$1 trillion in spending in the first year of his presidency as part of his Restoring America plan. Will that plan be enough to secure his nomination this time around? Congressman Paul joins us now, and I guess we are kind of nerds. Andrew and I, Andrew, we are nerds. Andrew and I are, okay, Andrew and I, Ron, because we have been going over some of the stuff, talking about it when the camera's not on, about whether any of these departments could be shut down, talking about that when this austerity we're supposedly going through at this point, we haven't cut anything. We've barely slowed the increase in spending that the government has every year, and we hit a new high. We're going to hit a new high in government spending in 2011. I guess those are some of the things you're trying to get across.
Well, we are in the midst of the worst debt crisis ever in all of history, so I cannot see how we can get out of this with increasing the debt around the world. Everybody talks about the debt crisis in Europe. We have a debt crisis here. That's why we have to cut back, but nobody has proposed any cuts. And I don't know how in the world you can get out of a problem of too much spending and too big a government by not cutting anything. So I'm amazed that this is a unique idea that we ought to cut. There's been a lot of talk in Washington, but they're always only talking about nibbling away at the proposed increases over the next 10 years. And most people see through that. Certainly the markets see through this. It doesn't restore confidence. So I'm saying in order to get back to growth again, you have to get rid of all the mistakes, all the malinvestment, all of the debt, and you can't keep dumping the debt on the people, whether it's through Treasury or through whether it's the Federal Reserve. And now I'm sure we're prepared to help bail out Greece and the European banks, just as we did in 08. So I think that's futile. I think that's just going to dig a much bigger hole for ourselves, and we're not allowing the correction to occur, which is absolutely necessary.
You know that you're talking about $1 trillion in cuts in 1 year. You're going to immediately hear about, you know, they tried austerity in Greece and it made things work. They tried austerity in the UK and it made things worse. The pain that people would talk about the American public feeling with $1 trillion in cuts, you will hear that would be, you know, there'd be no schools left open, there'd be no, grandma would be out in the snow. I mean, that's what you hear about $1 trillion, and that's what you need to get across, I think,
well,
Congressman.
Well, that's based on the assumption that government spending is always a plus. Sometimes government spending is actually a negative. What if we didn't have the spending on Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank? What would that do? That would certainly help. And actually, the program that I've designed, I get, you know, I reduce the number of people who are getting employed that are employed by the government through attrition. It's not like putting them out, but we have to change the course. We can't always expand the government. Every time we get into problems, we think we need another regulatory agency. You know, Sarbanes-Oxley didn't help us, and Dodd-Frank isn't helping. So why should we argue the case that the government needs to spend more money? But the programs that I've designed, I don't touch Social Security or medical care. And what we do is we cut the bureaucracy. That's negative spending. You take the money out of the economy, that's negative. And then when the bureaucrats spend the money, that's another negative. And I really go after, in something nobody else does, not even Obama will touch it, even though he campaigned on it, it's all this overseas spending. I mean, it's unbelievable, and there's nobody says it's even on the table. So unless we change our attitude about that, I don't think there's any chance we're going to get ourselves out of this. So this is why I've come up with this proposal.
Congressman, of course, you can imagine the blowback on the idea of cutting or eliminating, rather, the Department of Education. It doesn't sound good. How do you get around that and talk through that issue?
Well, I've been around the country a few times, and I've talked to a lot of people. That's my loudest applause line. Nobody thinks it's helped education. You know, it's a typical example. This is how we run schools in D.C. They get more money than anybody else, and the education is probably the worst. And all they say is we need more money. And so it's not part of our system. This is only recent history that we think the bureaucrats in Washington should dictate to all the schools in the country. And that's one of the places where we suffer the most. I mean, right now, to me, it's amazing that business people come up to me and they're looking for workers, but they're not trained. They're not trained. There's something dastardly wrong with our educational system to suggest that we go back to a constitutional relationship with the federal government and get rid of the Department of Education. Remember, remember Ronald Reagan ran on that just a few years ago, you know, a few decades ago, and yet today I think it's still very, very popular. I don't, on the campaign trail, I get no grief over that. I mean, people don't see any benefits. Maybe the people who are employed, you know, in Washington, but how does hiring a lot of bureaucrats in Washington and running a department up there make our educational system better? There's no indication it's happened. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite.
Congressman Paul, it's Harry Wilson. You know, a lot of the things in your plan you've talked about for years have been very consistent. One of the things that surprised me, though, is you really didn't tackle Social Security reform, Medicare reform, or fundamental reform of the personal income tax, which are, you know, obviously three hot-button issues that are critical to our long-term health. Why not? Why not tackle those in your plan?
Well, mainly because I see the Social Security as a contract that we should fulfill if at all possible. Because I believe I've never spent a penny out of Social Security. The funds would have been there because I don't vote for the appropriation bills. But no, there's something in Social Security that's very, very basic. And that is given the chance of everybody 25 and under to opt out. And I still have enough money to take the people who are dependent on it. The only grief I've gotten so far in that is somebody came up to me yesterday and says, I'm 26. Why can't I get out? And the people who are in their 30s, they'll be willing to get out too. They don't trust the government anymore to take care of them from cradle to grave, and they certainly don't expect Social Security to be very much worth anything, you know, come 20 or 30 years from now. So it is a very popular position. That's a major adjustment to Social Security.
Right, but everybody agrees that Medicare will go bust within 10 years, Democrats, Republicans alike. Everyone agrees that Social Security will go bust within, call it 20 years. As the leading libertarian voice in the country, aren't you advocating your responsibility by not tackling those right now?
Well, I mean, in time, you're suggesting that my approach was too meager, yet it's the most dramatic of anybody.
On those two issues, I think
that's right. That's right. I'm planning to do all these other things first. I want to get rid of, let's say, all the overseas spending before I say that we're going to adjust the payments on Social Security. What the people need to worry about is the Social Security recipients are being adjusted automatically because their cost of living is going up. Through inflation, they lose purchasing power, so their benefits are going down. I would stop the inflation. I would not cut their benefits. I'd work our way out of this. I'd cut elsewhere and try to fulfill these promises that we have made through Social Security, and I wouldn't attack child health care. Not that philosophically I could defend that strongly, but you can't have everything in one day, so I have picked and choose those things I think are most necessary and cut the things that I think are the least necessary, and those are those particular departments as well as the overseas spending.
What about taxes, Congressman?
Taxes, did you say?
Yeah. What should we do? What should it look like? What should if we did reform the tax code, what should it look like? The 999?
Yeah, and it's true. This program it deals with cutting taxes, you know, the corporate tax and trying to repatriate money from overseas and encourage that. But it doesn't address the whole thing. I certainly wouldn't advocate a national sales tax and a national VAT tax in addition to, other taxes going on. So I would address that later. But the perfect goal is getting rid of the income tax. We've only had that for 100 years. Most of our history we didn't have an income tax, but you got to get control of things first. You got to it's a spending problem. The tax problem, whether it's flat tax or sales tax, that is a symptom of too much spending, and the people have to ask, what should the role of government be? And I don't think the role of government should be to police the world or run an entitlement system.
Should the role of government be to make sure that there's not a huge wealth disparity? We see it written that societies in the past, when it gets too wide, the disparity, it sees things like guillotines. I know that was feudalism, it wasn't a meritocracy, but we're hearing things like that now, Congressman. Is it the government's role to try to even things out among all the people that it's governing?
No, I think it's the role of the marketplace. That's sort of trying to pick winners and losers and bail out the unsuccessful and punish the successful. That's what governments do, because then that invites the lobbyists to come in, and you say, well, let's have regulations to iron things out. So who writes the regulations? It's usually the industries who have the most money to lobby Congress. So no, I think it's a fallacy to think that governments are there to develop a fair and equal playing field. That's a basic assumption of socialism, to come in and make everything fair. We want everything honest, no fraud, and everybody fulfill their promises, and no bailouts, and no privileges to the wealthy. And that's what we have today.
Part of what you're saying suggests, though, that you sympathize, and maybe I'm wrong, with some of the Occupy Wall Streeters on the argument about the bailouts, because so much of their argument, there is the economic inequality issue, but also the function of the fact that the bailouts, in their mind, I think, they argue that the bailouts created some of that economic inequality.
Well, certainly I'm not going to defend everybody on the sit-ins and the demonstrations, but certainly I do defend those who have their head screwed on right and say, yes, we're sick and tired of the bailouts. And when corporations and banks get help at the expense of the middle class, just think of all the bailouts protected a lot of banks, and they're still in business. But the middle class lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So I sympathize tremendously with them. But if they're going to attack profits for the sake of profits, and those individuals got rich because they gave a good product and didn't get benefits from the government, no, I want to defend them. I want to defend the marketplace. But no, but right now our biggest problem is the bailouts and the subsidies and the privileges given to some but not the others. And this system that we have of money and government regulation will eventually destroy the middle class, and we're on that road. Right now the middle class is shrinking, the poor are getting more numerous, and the wealthy are getting wealthier, and they have a reason to gripe about that. But it's not because the few are productive, it's because the system is designed to help those who know how to lobby Washington and get either regulation or the tax code written in their favor. So yes, I sympathize a whole lot with the people who are sitting out and demonstrating for the right reasons.
Right. Well said. All right, Congressman, thanks. Appreciate your time. Hang in there. I don't know what's going to happen this time around. You keep plugging away.
Well.
Yeah, I know. And we certainly like. It gives you a great podium, and we love hearing it. Thank you.